Welcome, folks. Let's talk about the moment we're living in right now. A moment where logic has gone the way of Blockbuster, and the loudest voices in the room are the ones shouting about justice while lighting your paycheck on fire. Welcome to America 2025, where the left thinks spending $10 trillion on vibes and windmills is an economic masterstroke, and losing your congressional seat just means it's time for a podcast. Today, we're diving into Democrat delusions, starting with Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman, two former lawmakers now trying to spin their political evictions as moral victories. Spoiler alert, when your biggest legacy is a bill that costs $10 trillion and still can't pass a breathalyzer test for fiscal sanity, maybe it's time to sit this one out. But hey, who needs electoral wins when you've got hashtags, am I right? So buckle up. We're breaking down the left's greatest hits of magical thinking, political cosplay, and economic fan fiction.
There were going to be two separate bills, and we had already had those conversations, but when it was clear, remember, the investment kept going down, down, down. And we were like, no, because we need this investment. We need, like you said, the money. That was more money for lead pipes than what we had.
I think it was 3.9 trillion. Did it start at 3.9 and go down, or did it?
We were at, I thought we were at 10, and then it went down to 6, and then down to 3, then it went down to 1.7, I believe.
Let's take a moment to appreciate what we just witnessed. Two former members of Congress, Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman, fumbling through basic arithmetic like a group project where nobody did the reading. What we're hearing isn't a policy discussion. It's political karaoke. They're trying to harmonize over a $10 trillion climate fantasy, the Thrive Act, without even remembering the lyrics or the price tag. They both throw out numbers. 3.9 trillion, but it started at 10 trillion. Then maybe 6, or was it 1.7? It's like watching someone trying to guess the total on The Price is Right, except the prize is your tax dollars. Now let's cut through the verbal fog. The Thrive Act, originally floated in 2021, was a progressive fever dream. $10 trillion over 10 years for everything from climate justice to care infrastructure, a term so vague it can mean anything from nursing homes to interpretive dance therapy. And we know how much Democrats love interpretive dance therapy. I mean, just look at how much money they sent over to Peru for all their theatrical stuff. It was never scored by the Congressional Budget Office, never seriously considered by leadership, and never had a path to passage. Why? Because most of Congress, yes, even Democrats, knew this bill was a fiscal lunacy dressed up in social justice jargon. Now, Bush and Bowman's rhetorical tactic here is a classic moral panic investment pitch. Inflate a crisis, lead pipes, racial disparities, melting ice caps, then frame any opposition as morally bankrupt. If you question the numbers, you're against justice. If you want a cost-benefit analysis, you're siding with the oppressor. It's not a debate. It's a hostage situation wrapped in activist word salad. And notice the bait and switch in their emotional appeal. They mention lead pipes, a legitimate concern, then pivot to vague investment needs, and finally land on climate justice, a term with zero measurable outcomes but infinite price tags. This is the progressive version of a timeshare pitch. Sell utopia and dodge the fine print. Now, about those jobs, yes, the plan claimed it would create 15 million new jobs, but that's not actual growth. That's government-funded employment. That's Keynesian cosplay at scale. You don't stimulate the economy by handing out shovels and digging holes just to fill them back with solar panels. You do it by incentivizing real innovation, not central planning on a $10 trillion monopoly budget. And let's not forget the math. Cori and Jamal float numbers like they're guessing lotto tickets. 3.9 trillion here, 10 trillion there, but these aren't rounding numbers. They're entire GDPs. If you're advocating to remake the American economy with a price tag bigger than the entire federal budget, the least you could do is remember the actual number. And their fallback, of course, is the "but it's needed" argument, an appeal to emotion that conveniently avoids reality. Yes, climate is an issue. Yes, communities need investment, but blowing through $10 trillion on a green fever dream without accountability, ROI, or even a coherent rollout plan isn't bold, it's reckless. It's the legislative equivalent of putting your house on the market to buy crypto at the top. Now, I don't think I have to tell any of you folks, but part of the core duty of a member of Congress isn't to just rubber stamp spending proposals. They're supposed to justify how taxpayer money is being used and ensure it's spent responsibly. But instead of engaging in that basic function of oversight, activists activists turned politicians like Bush and Bowman cloak themselves in moral absolutism and emotional theatrics, creating a fog of buzzwords like justice and equity to avoid doing the hard work of accountability. It's easier to invoke oppression than explain why a $10 trillion bill has no clear metrics, no viable funding mechanism, and no realistic path to implementation. The activist fog isn't a bug, it's the whole strategy designed to distract from the fact that they're failing at the job they were elected to do. In the end, what we just witnessed wasn't an economic discussion, it was political therapy. Two ousted ideologues trying to rewrite their legacy as visionary martyrs instead of what they really were, ineffective legislators who mistook hashtags for policy and shock value for governance. America didn't reject their ideas because we're too slow to embrace change. We rejected them because we can still do basic math. And apparently, that's more than we can say for the people who wrote this bill. And moving right along down the Democrat halls of inefficiency, here we have Jasmine Crockett, who yesterday made quite a case for herself as to why she should also lose her congressional seat. And it all started with this clip.
And so, yeah, I'm excited to see that Elon Musk, that his money as it relates to Tesla, well, Tesla's tanking right now. And I'm okay with that.
Ah, yes. Nothing screams, I care about the American people, quite like cheering for the financial decline of a major U.S. company employing over 140,000 people worldwide. Enter Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, who proudly announces she's excited about Tesla struggling because apparently watching an innovative American business face headwinds is now a cause for celebration if the CEO happens to hurt your feelings on X. This isn't policy. This is petty vindictiveness wrapped in a soundbite, the political equivalent of keying someone's car and calling it activism, something that the left knows very well, apparently. Now let's break down this rhetorical mess. First, we've got the classic ad hominem by proxy, attacking Elon Musk personally by wishing financial harm on Tesla, a publicly traded company with millions of retail investors, retirement funds, and pension portfolios tied up in its stock. It's not just Elon's money. It's the 401k of a teacher in Nebraska, the retirement of a nurse in Ohio, the investment of a middle-class father in Georgia. But Crockett's framing conveniently ignores that reality because reducing economic complexity to a cartoon villain makes it easier to justify childish glee at another person's misfortune. Crockett acts like Tesla's tanking is somehow poetic justice for Musk's political leanings. Never mind that Tesla helped pioneer the electric vehicle market, drastically advanced battery tech, and put EVs on the map long before it was fashionable. This is the left eating its own ideology, celebrating the fall of the very company that made green energy vehicles mainstream simply because the CEO won't play nice with the DNC narrative machine. The hypocrisy isn't subtle, it's staggering. Oh, let's clear up the financial fiction. Tesla's stock is volatile, sure, just like every tech company operating in a tightening economy and dealing with global supply chain issues. But calling that tanking is dishonest at best, willfully ignorant at worst. The company remains one of the most valuable car manufacturers in the world. Its long-term growth, profit margins, and innovation pipeline still outpace the legacy auto industry by a mile. But hey, don't let facts get in the way of a hot mic moment. And this brings us to the real issue. This is performative politics. Crockett isn't offering solutions. She's just throwing shade. She's not legislating. She's just playing pundit on TV. Her job isn't to root for economic failure out of spite. It's to safeguard the well-being of her constituents, many of whom probably benefit from the kind of jobs, technologies, and investments that companies like Tesla create. But in today's Democrat playbook, economic sabotage is acceptable as long as it gets clout on social media. In the end, what we're witnessing isn't leadership. It's lazy populism fueled by personal vendettas and propped up by a media ecosystem that rewards outrage over outcomes. If Crockett spent half as much time understanding the economy as she does dunking on billionaires, maybe her district would be celebrating growth instead of watching their representative cheer on decline like it's a halftime show. Now, Crockett, ever the low IQ, spiteful bigot, also went viral for these comments she made at the Human Rights Campaign.
Day that the person that should have been president had to deliver her concession speech, I honestly didn't know how I was gonna get out of bed. When I tell y'all, I'm getting emotional, that I traveled this country.
Oh my God, shut up, dude.
Because I knew it was gonna be bad. I didn't know it was gonna be this fucking bad shit, but I knew. And I knew that the obstacles were going to be even greater because not only was it a woman, but it was a woman of color.
Here we go again. Another emotional TED Talk from Representative Jasmine Crockett, where tears flow more freely than facts and identity politics is the only item on the menu. This time, she's crying on stage because Kamala Harris didn't become president, and somehow we're all supposed to believe the American people rejected her, not because of her dismal record, not because of her robotic speeches, not because she polled lower than a root canal, but because she's a black woman. That's the entire thesis. That's the grand revelation. Not competence, not policy, not likability, just melanin and chromosomes. Let's unpack the rhetorical sludge here. Crockett leads with an appeal to emotion, the crying, the trembling voice, the dramatic, I didn't know how I was gonna get out of bed. This isn't just political theater, it's political deflection. When you can't defend a candidate on merit, you default to performance. It's not about persuading anyone, it's about guilting them into silence, and it's insulting and manipulative. Next comes the straw man. Crockett doesn't address the actual reasons why Americans, including a sizable number of Democrats, didn't want Kamala Harris anywhere near the Oval Office. Let's not forget, she dropped out of the 2020 primary before Iowa, polling in the low single digits and burning through campaign cash like it was going out of style. Voters didn't reject her because she was a black woman. They rejected her because she came off as a deeply inauthentic, politically opportunistic, and completely out of touch. This is the same Kamala Harris who said she believed Joe Biden's accusers, then joined his ticket. The same Harris who laughed awkwardly through interviews when asked serious questions about the border crisis. But sure, let's pretend the only obstacle she faced was racism and sexism. This is where Crockett deploys the false cause fallacy, claiming that Harris lost support because she's a woman of color, while conveniently ignoring the dumpster fire that was her campaign, her historically low approval ratings as vice president, and her inability to connect with anyone outside of Brooklyn's brunch crowd. This isn't critical analysis. It's race and gender Mad Libs designed to shield failed leadership from accountability. And let's talk about what's missing here. Any shred of introspection, no reflection on policy, no recognition that maybe Americans want more than identity checkboxes. Maybe they want results. Maybe Americans want leaders who show up, speak clearly, and don't treat every public appearance like a spoken word performance about systemic oppression. The left has weaponized identity politics to such a degree that they now treat any loss as proof of bias, never once asking whether the person they put on the pedestal actually earned the public trust. So here's the brutal truth. Representation matters, yes, but competence matters more. And when people like Crockett melt down in public because their preferred candidate didn't win and then blame it on skin color and gender, all they're doing is telling voters that merit is irrelevant and accountability is optional. That's not empowerment, that's straight up entitlement. So cry all you want, Congresswoman, but don't confuse emotional catharsis with political insight. America didn't reject Kamala Harris because of what she looks like. We rejected her because of what she represents. Empty symbolism over substance, identity over integrity, and spin over solutions. Now, Crockett also went viral yesterday for making these comments about Texas Governor Greg Abbott, who, by the way, is wheelchair bound. Trust me, it'll make sense when you hear it.
A lot of people see you out front fighting, but nobody's really asking you, what do you need to maintain that fight? So thank you so much, Morgan, because we in these hot ass Texas streets, honey. Y'all know we got Governor Hot Wheels down there. Come on now. And the only thing hot about him is that he is a hot ass mess, honey. So yes. Right. Okay. All right. I'm gonna move on because I got other people this also hot in these streets.
Nothing says human rights campaign quite like mocking a man in a wheelchair. Jasmine Crockett, in her never-ending quest to prove that class, decency, and basic professionalism are optional for elected officials, decided to take a swing at Texas Governor Greg Abbott by calling him Governor Hot Wheels, because apparently slinging playground insults at a paraplegic is peak progressivism now. This wasn't a gaffe, by the way. It wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was a calculated, crowd-pleasing jab delivered in a speech supposedly about human dignity. The irony is so thick you could pave Texas roads with it, if Crockett hadn't already turned the discourse into rubble. Now let's dissect this, because it's more than just bad taste. It's political cowardice dressed as sass. First is the textbook definition of ableist rhetoric. You know, The thing Crockett's own party claims to stand firmly against. The same left that wants to lecture the country on inclusive language, safe spaces, and lived experience seems to lose all their moral high ground the second someone with an R next to their name has a disability. Suddenly, it's open season. That's not advocacy, that's hypocrisy with a microphone. Now let's talk about the distraction tactic here. When politicians have nothing of substance to offer, no solutions, no accomplishments, no coherent arguments, they resort to ridicule. Abbott has done what few governors could, stabilized a Texas economy, drawn major corporate investment, and protected the border while the federal government naps. But instead of debating him on policy where Crockett would get flattened, she goes for the cheap laugh about his wheelchair. It's not bravery. That's what insecure people do when they're out of their depth. And her audience's reaction? Applause. Because political tribalism now runs so deep that mocking a man's disability is perfectly acceptable as long as he votes the wrong way. This is how far the discourse has collapsed. One side demands you use 97 made-up pronouns under threat of cancellation and ending all of your business while cheering on public mockery of a man who can't walk because it fits their narrative. This isn't about principles, it's about power. And when power becomes your only metric, cruelty becomes a tool, not a vice. And let's address the final absurdity. This took place at the Human Rights Campaign. You can't make this up. A group that claims to advocate for the marginalized, the voiceless, the vulnerable, hosting a speaker who uses a disabled man's condition as a punchline. That's not human rights. That's political theater staged by people who don't actually believe their own slogans. Because if you did, you wouldn't hand the mic to someone who thinks Hot Wheels is how you hold power to account. And you wouldn't clap for it when it comes up, and you wouldn't laugh at it either. So look, if Jasmine Crockett's idea of leadership is mean girl comedy at the expense of the disabled, maybe she belongs on a Netflix roast special, not in Congress. Until then, spare us the lectures on respect, tolerance, or dignity. You forfeited that the second you used a wheelchair as a punchline and called it progress. Now, Crockett responded to the backlash on X, and instead of owning the insult, she doubled down, deflected, and tried to reframe the controversy as a distraction. She said, "I wasn't thinking about the governor's condition. I was thinking about the planes, trains, and automobiles he used to transfer migrants into communities led by black mayors, deliberately stoking tension and fear among the most vulnerable." Literally, the next line I said was that he was a hot-ass mess, referencing his terrible policies. At no point did I mention or allude to his condition. So I'm even more appalled that the very people who unequivocally support Trump, a man known for racially insensitive nicknames and mocking those with disabilities, are now outraged. Keep the same energy for all people, not just your political adversaries. Finally, this is yet another distraction. Instead of obsessing over and hanging on to my every word, maybe my political foes should focus on doing the work of the people who elected us to improve their lives. And then she shares an unrelated article in her cope. Oh, so now the defense is, I wasn't thinking about the governor's condition, as if that somehow makes calling a man in a wheelchair Governor Hot Wheels any less disgusting. Jasmine Crockett's non-apology reads like a master class in political gaslighting, where the goal isn't accountability, it's misdirection. Let's be crystal clear. If you're on stage at a human rights campaign event and you mock someone with a nickname that directly references their wheelchair, you don't get to pretend it had nothing to do with their disability. It's not plausible deniability, it's insulting everyone's intelligence. And it shows how little she thinks of the American public. Now, she throws out this red herring, attempting to make us believe that her real target was Abbott's immigration policy. Planes, trains, and automobiles, as if this were some kind of John Candy movie. But here's the thing. If you're critiquing policy, you don't need to dip into junior high name calling that just happens to align with a man's disability. If a Republican called a blind Democrat governor Captain Kane, there wouldn't be this cute little game of plausible context. There'd be a full-blown moral panic from every corner of her party. Then she loops Trump in a pathetic attempt at whataboutism, the all-purpose shield for progressive bad behavior. But Trump said mean things too. That's not a rebuttal. It's a confession that you have no standards unless they serve your side. If Crockett truly believed in decency, her outrage wouldn't be so selectively deployed. She'd hold herself to a higher standard than the guy she claims to oppose. Instead, we get this tired two-step. Criticize me and I'll point to Trump as cover fire while dodging any real responsibility. She also leans hard on moral inversion. Apparently, the real villains here are the people obsessing over her words, not the sitting congresswoman who mocked the disabled governor on stage like she was auditioning for a Comedy Central roast. She claims critics are distracted, as if the problem is that people noticed her saying the quiet part out loud. Here's a thought. Maybe if you don't want people to hang onto your every word, you should choose your words wisely, especially when speaking at an event dedicated to inclusion and dignity. And let's not miss the final absurdity at play here. She wraps it all up with a smug scolding that others should focus on doing the work of the people. Ma'am, you're the one who turned a public policy event into a stand-up special. You're the one who made yourself the headline. If you don't want to be held accountable for your words, maybe stop using public platforms as they shout middle school level jabs at disabled officials and pretending that's activism. Obviously, this wasn't a slip-up. It wasn't out of context. It was a moment of cruelty disguised as cleverness, followed by a PR cleanup job that insulted everyone's intelligence. If Crockett wants to lead, maybe start by acting like it and save the Hot Wheels jokes for someone who doesn't carry a seat in Congress. Now, Crockett's excuses didn't go far because the Washington Free Beacon exposed exactly what anyone with common sense already suspected. Her backpedaling wasn't just weak, it was flat out dishonest. While Crockett tried to reframe her Hot Wheels insult as a clever jab at Governor Abbott's migrant busing policy, which didn't even start until 2022, the receipts show she was already using the nickname in 2021, well before the busing ever began. Not only that, she actively liked and reacted with hearts and smiley faces to Facebook comments mocking Abbott as Hot Wheels months before the policy she now claims was the real target even existed. So let's be clear, this wasn't a one-off joke taken out of context. This was part of a pattern. Crockett has been playing to the cheap seats with ableist mockery for years. And now that she's been caught, she's trying to rewrite history like Facebook never had a like button. She knew what she was saying. She meant it, and she's not sorry it went viral. She's just sorry that you're not too stupid to fall for her rhetoric. This is what happens when performative politics meets zero accountability. Instead of owning the insult, Crockett doubled down, got exposed, and now hopes everyone will move on. But voters should remember this moment for what it is, a clear window into the kind of leader who talks inclusion on stage and cheers on disability jokes behind the screen. Now, this wasn't where Crockett's troubles ended yesterday, because later that day, she physically attacked journalist Charles Downs of Loomer Unleashed in the halls of Congress. Take a look.
Bar, shoveling horse manure.
Hello, Congresswoman.
Horse manure. Well, that sounds like fun.
Yeah, well.
Wait, Congresswoman Crockett.
But it sounds.
Congresswoman Crockett, you were recently on a Tesla takedown call calling for violence on the 29th. Would you like to clarify your comments?
As you can see.
Congresswoman, will you condone violence at the...
Well, it looks like Crockett has moved from verbal jabs to literal physical assault. According to multiple reports and the video evidence we just watched, Crockett attacked D.C. correspondent Charles Downs, scratching his hand and attempting to rip his phone away like a toddler throwing a tantrum in the cereal aisle. Why? Because he dared to ask her a basic question. Would she condemn the violence at Tesla showrooms? The same violence she helped incite just 5 days ago during her so-called Tesla takedown call with far-left agitators. Spoiler alert, she didn't answer the question. She just assaulted the reporter. Now, let's be clear. This wasn't just another media meltdown. This is a sitting member of Congress putting her hands on a journalist inside the halls of Congress. An actual assault, not a metaphor. And yet somehow the same Democrats who screamed democracy dies in darkness when Jim Acosta got a dirty look are now completely silent. No press conferences, no breathless op-eds, no MSNBC think pieces, because apparently violence is fine as long as it's being wielded by Democrats, not against them. And her defenders, if they even bother showing up, will likely fall back on the usual rhetorical smokescreens. She was provoked. She felt threatened. Or the old faithful, that reporter is far right. But none of that matters. The moment you physically attack a member of the press for asking a question, the moral high ground isn't just gone, it's buried in a landfill. You don't get to play the victim of misinformation when your acrylic claws leave red marks on a journalist's skin. That's not spin, that's battery. Let's also not ignore the context she's hoping no one remembers. Crockett was part of a coordinated campaign to target Tesla. The language she and her activist allies used wasn't peaceful. It was charged, aggressive, and openly confrontational. They framed it as a takeover, not a protest. So when violence did erupt, vandalism, disruptions, threats, firebombing vehicles, what did Crockett do? She doubled down. She didn't denounce the chaos, she leaned into it, and when finally pressed for accountability, she lashed out violently like a coward trying to silence the question, not answer it. And this is the exact behavior the left pretends to oppose: intimidation, political violence, suppression of press freedom. But when it comes from their side, they don't condemn it, they justify it, which is why Speaker Johnson must move swiftly to censure Jasmine Crockett, not just for the assault, but for what it represents: the normalization of violence by elected officials who think being challenged by a journalist is grounds for a physical attack. Look, this isn't just about Charles Downs. It's about whether the Capitol is a place of lawmaking or lawlessness. And right now, Jasmine Crockett has made it clear she prefers the latter. So ask yourself, what kind of country do we become when the people who scream the loudest about justice feel entitled to violence, and the ones who demand accountability are treated like criminals? When elected officials can mock disabilities, incite chaos, and physically attack reporters with no real consequences, are we still talking about leadership, or is something far more dangerous masquerading as progress? If the rules only apply to one side, are they rules at all, or just tools of control dressed up in moral language? At what point do we stop accepting the media's selective outrage and start questioning the entire framework that enables this double standard? These aren't just political stunts, they're signals. And if you're not paying attention, you're not just being misled, you're being conditioned. You tell me what you think in the comments down below. Have a terrific day. Peace.